Welcome, everyone, to another special edition of TITV, where we are bringing you some real-time analysis here of the news of the day. OpenAI has completed its restructuring. Microsoft is getting a 27% stake. This is news that we have been waiting to come out for a long time, and so I want to break it all down with our newsroom. Aaron Holmes is our Microsoft reporter here at The Information, and Sri Mupidi covers all things OpenAI and Anthropic. Sri, I want to start with you. Give us a little bit of the details of the news here. We've been waiting for this story to unfold. What do we know now, and what questions are we waiting to have answered still?
Exactly. We've been definitely waiting for this news for a long time. So the news in particular is that OpenAI successfully completed its restructuring. As you may know, the company had initially been founded as a nonprofit in 2015. 4 years later, it created a for-profit subsidiary so that it can take on some additional funding. And then last year, as part of its $6.6 billion fundraise and the current year's $41 billion fundraise, the company had promised investors and other shareholders that it would complete a corporate restructuring to turn into a public benefit corporation. That basically allows the company to be able to successfully go public if it chooses to and paves that path, or also continue to fundraise and have investors reap the returns that they seek to in a traditional way. And so what this really means for the company is that all the various stakeholders, for example, Microsoft, the nonprofit, employees and investors get the equity stakes that they've been we've been looking and thinking about. So Microsoft, for example, roughly gets 27% of OpenAI, which means $135 billion of the company. The nonprofit, which is now called the OpenAI Foundation, gets roughly 26%, and that's worth $130 billion, and addresses some of the concerns from the AGs as well as other nonprofit advocates that were worried about, for example, the charitable mission of OpenAI being potentially diluted. And so OpenAI thinks that these sort of the ability for the company, the nonprofit foundation, to get $130 billion addresses some of that. And that OpenAI has also said that investors, as well as current and former employees, hold roughly 47% of the company. We had previously reported a lot of those details in the past. And so it also implies that the employee vehicle in which current and former employees are a part of, as well as any investors that participated in employee tenders, has roughly 25% of the company, which is worth $125 billion. Basically, it just really irons out a lot of the equity stakes that a lot of folks were worried and thinking about for the last year and a half.
I'm smiling because, like you've just laid out, I mean, there are so many details. I mean, there's so much news here. Aaron, I want to go to you. Microsoft, they were a tough negotiator in this, and we've been waiting to see what stake they get, but also how things would shake out in terms of the models that they're allowed to use, the compute angle to this. Tell us about what Microsoft is getting here, and if it ultimately is what they wanted.
Yeah, so Microsoft is getting a few things other than the 27% stake. A large one being that they will continue to have the rights to use OpenAI's intellectual property. That means all of its AI models that the startup develops until 2032. Microsoft can keep using those models in perpetuity. And there's also this clause about AGI, which is when OpenAI achieves AI that's as good as a human at most work. The startup will be able to declare that, but it's now specified that an independent group will have to verify that it has reached that goal. And at that point, Microsoft will lose the exclusivity that it has over OpenAI. So both companies kind of getting something that they wanted there. And then I think the third thing that really matters is that Microsoft is essentially giving up the exclusive rights to be OpenAI's cloud provider. We had already seen them let OpenAI do deals with other clouds like Oracle, but they had held on to this right of first refusal where they could, essentially claim first dibs on any OpenAI compute jobs. And they are basically giving that up now. At the same time, Microsoft also gets to now work with other AI startups, and it can pursue AGI on its own, which previously it had agreed that it would not do during its deal with OpenAI.
So I should say, before we get into some analysis here, Aaron, you talked about an independent party deciding when they reach AGI. Do we know anything about who that group is or how far out that might be?
We don't really know the answer to either of those. I mean, Sam Altman has implied repeatedly that OpenAI is basically on the verge of AGI, and we've heard Satya Nadella say publicly that he thinks AGI is a long way out. But in any case, there will essentially be this independent group of economic and tech experts who have to verify that the technology is actually at that level before Microsoft loses its exclusivity.
So I want to come back to you, Shri. It's kind of, we have our OpenAI reporter and we have our Microsoft reporter here, and naturally, with any kind of negotiation, there is a discussion about who won. Uh, Shri, do you think this is everything OpenAI wanted? Was there something they would have wanted more of? Who do you think wins here?
I think it's a fairly good compromise on both sides, because there are pieces that OpenAI really wins in some ways, and that it can, for example, pursue cloud compute contracts with other providers, not just Microsoft. And it can, for example, use Azure or other types of cloud providers to serve certain types of customers, such as like government customers. But in other ways too, like it does give Microsoft some Microsoft wins in some ways as well. For example, having access to those IP rights, as Aaron had spoken about, beyond just like what they had initially anticipated. And so I think it was a fairly good compromise on both parts, and obviously was something that the companies had both been working on for the last like year or so.
Hmm. And what about Microsoft investors, Aaron? How do they feel about this?
I think a lot of investors are just happy to have this uncertainty gone of what size stake Microsoft would have in the business,
Mhm.
and certainly happy to see that. At the same time, Microsoft doesn't get any sort of governance in the form of a board seat because OpenAI is, governed by its nonprofit, according to the announcement. So that might still be the cause of some nervousness in terms of how Microsoft is going to, I guess, steer the future of this massive investment. But I do think that the lack or the loss of that uncertainty has helped Microsoft, and we saw its stock pop a few points today once the deal was announced for that reason.
Aaron, I just want to back up here a little bit because, a 27% stake is not a small stake, and we've reported a lot of the ways in which OpenAI and Microsoft are very much going head to head. I mean, can you just talk a little bit about this kind of interesting relationship now? They have this huge stake. We've talked about how the hyperscalers are trying to develop their own chips. OpenAI is obviously working with Broadcom on their own chip. Then there's the model element. There's obviously selling to enterprises as a whole. I mean, does this relationship get any less murky here, or is it really just about as confusing as we still thought?
I mean, in theory, Microsoft now has an equity stake that it didn't have before, and that alone, I think, is a win for its investors. At the same time, there is a hint that we're going to see even more competition between OpenAI and Microsoft. And, I think as we've reported in the past couple months, we've seen Microsoft start to work more closely with firms like Anthropic that compete with OpenAI. Microsoft also has an internal division that is training their own AI models, although that effort is still basically getting off the ground. I think we're going to probably see that speed up even more in the coming years. At the same time, Microsoft can tell its customers that it still is the place where you can buy OpenAI models in the cloud. That part is not going away between now and 2032. So I think that, Microsoft has a lot of reasons to be happy with this deal, but we're probably going to see more competition, and the AI race will speed up even more.
And Shri, last question for you. OpenAI is, of course, one of the fastest moving companies in tech right now. What are you watching for as the story continues to unfold, and what questions do you still have about the direction that the company's going here?
I think that this restructuring really clears a huge obstacle that had been on OpenAI's like mind for a long time. And so right now, this allows OpenAI to be able to fundraise without sort of any of the constraints that it previously had to deal with. So I look out for maybe more fundraisers coming in the future. I don't anticipate that the company wants to go public yet. And so we have some reporting around that. And so I think that there will be future private fundraisers coming soon, or potentially like next year or so. Other things that I would look out for is new types of products and cloud compute contracts that we've already been seeing hints of with Oracle, for example, and others. And so I think that this just allows OpenAI to be able to fully pursue all of its goals without maybe, for example, checking in with Microsoft before it lands a new compute deal.
Right. Well, thank you for joining us for this special edition of TITV. We've got a bunch of special editions happening this week, but the news moves fast and furious. We will be back in your streams tomorrow at 10 a.m. Pacific, 1 p.m. Eastern. Have a great rest of your Tuesday. Bye-bye for now.